Well, welcome to what I believe is the fourth webinar in this series. This one is brought to you by Women's Business Development Center. We are Business Services Collective and are partnering with WBDC. The title of the webinar is Strategy to Budget. We would be naive to say we can teach you everything about budgeting in an hour. So we are focusing on one aspect of budgeting, which is cost analysis, which we'll go over in detail with you. Before I move on, I'll request Lydia as our lead partner from WBDC to share about why we are doing these, the background of these presentations.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lydia Bologna with the Women's Business Development Center. Welcome to the City of Chicago's nonprofit, welcome to the City of Chicago's nonprofit capacity building program and to the Strategy to Budget webinar. So the WBDC is a nonprofit contracted by the city to provide rich educational opportunities such as this webinar and weekly workshops and one-on-one coaching sessions. Under the City of Chicago's recovery plan, there will be opportunities for availability of funds through grant programs to nonprofit organizations. Our goal is to help you apply for government grant opportunities to set you up with City of Chicago and state grant funding. Historically, the WBDC helps for-profit organizations that want to start and grow businesses. Under the Chicago Recovery Plan, we are here to help you better respond to grants that will become available to organizations impacted by COVID-19, primarily organizations working in low and moderate communities with budgets under $1 million. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to today's learnings.
Thank you, Lydia. So, if we were to define success for today's webinar, I would say there are three things. One, that you get a slightly better understanding than you had before this webinar about cost analysis within budget and how important it is as part of your budgeting process. Second, you can see budget and budgeting as a tool for financial health, and that motivates you to get a financial health assessment. I'll get into that in a little bit. And then last, but definitely not the least, and maybe the most important thing, that you are inspired enough to schedule a follow-up conversation with one of our experts. Because as informational as these webinars are, they are generic. They provide information at a 30,000 feet level. What your particular organization needs can only be explored and understood in a one-on-one setting. And I believe some of you were doing that right before this today. So you already may have seen the value of those sessions. So let me share a little bit about the agenda for today, how we will do what we do. We've done the introductions already. You know about why this workshop is taking place, what's the context of that. For those who came a little late, we've put a survey, a Google survey, with just 6 questions, which helps us understand who's in the room. So if you can please complete that. We will talk about budgeting as a tool for financial health, and we'll get into what financial health is in a bit. We will then get into, we had hoped to do breakout sessions, but since this group is really small, we'll actually just all be in the same room and do a mini budgeting exercise. And then towards the end, we'll point you towards resources and next steps that can help you with your journey. So before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about Business Services Collective. My organization, myself and Kyle, are co-founders of BSC. We are a small nonprofit launched in 2020 in the midst of COVID. Our vision and work is around reducing the racial wealth gap, and the way we do it is by focusing on entrepreneurship as a path towards wealth creation. We are focused on BIPOC entrepreneurs within the construction industry. Typically, around 500,000 in revenues is what the size of the businesses that we start working with. And the lens we use to work with them is financial health. We offer back office support services which help businesses get in control of the financial side of their house, better financial management. They're able to understand their financials, produce their financials, and be better prepared for lenders. But all this is in the spirit of that they become more financially healthy businesses, because if they are financially healthy, rest everything will follow. They will be able to be profitable. They will be able to be job creators and wealth creators in their community. But the fulcrum we rely on is financial health. And the way we define financial health is a business's ability and the existence of daily systems which give it a capacity to sustain shocks and pursue opportunities. So any a business which cannot make payroll or cannot pay its bills because just one of its clients could not pay them on time would maybe not have that ability to sustain shocks. If a business wants to go after a contract but is unable to do it because it cannot accurately predict the payroll needs and make that kind of payroll, then maybe that business is not in a financially healthy situation. And again, we look at it not on a one-off basis, but on a consistently, do you have the systems in place to be able to sustain shocks and pursue opportunities? And the way we think about how this translates for what does it mean? What will a business do if it's financially healthy? It'll be able to plan for risks and variability. It'll be able to manage its financial systems, and it'll be able to fund through equity or debt its growth needs. We want to then apply the same lens of financial health to a nonprofit, because that's the audience we're talking to here right now, and we are a nonprofit ourselves. So what would it mean for a nonprofit to be financially healthy? With the similar parameters of plan, manage, fund, this is how we would define a nonprofit which is financially healthy. When it can pay its vendors, it can plan for staffing, compensation, benefits, and it has the ability to budget for future financial obligations. It is able to manage by meeting its short-term and long-term obligations. It is able to determine the cost of its services, optimize operations, and it has ability of a diverse funding portfolio. So not all or most of its funding should come from private, not all or most of its funding should come from government source. And so the ability that you are able to, as a nonprofit, to diversify your funding, to generate consistent income, and to have a cash flow that helps you, again, sustain shocks and pursue opportunities. A budget, we believe, is actually a tool for financial health, because a budget also helps you plan, manage, and fund. And how that happens, I'll request my colleague Kyle to help us figure out. But the definition of budget that appealed to us was a budget is a planning tool that reflects an organization's program, mission, and strategic plan. So with that, and to tell us more about budgeting, I'll hand over to Kyle.
Thanks, Nitika. If you go to the next slide. So I just want to start with how the budget acts as this tool for financial health. And you'll see a budget, like many other financial health systems, is not relegated to just one of the buckets, plan, manage, fund, but actually impacts all three. So what we'll be seeing today as we walk through an exercise of creating a program budget is that a lot of the prep work for a budget is literally planning out a program step by step. So it's a helpful planning tool in determining, as we're looking at the year ahead, what are all the resources, the staff, the time, the participants, the materials that we're going to need to deliver this program, which can then, as we're budgeting it for it, spark some ahas on some of the capacity building we may need to do to gear up for that program if it's funded. On the managed side, by creating a budget, we've a lot of times we create the budget. The impetus is we see a grant application and they're asking for a budget. So we say, okay, now I need to create a budget and tell you how I'm going to spend the money. But the exercise of creating that budget also tells me how I'm going to spend the money. So once I've created it, I can use that as a management tool as we're running the program to make sure we're spending the funds in roughly the allocations that we had planned for, to say, okay, we had expected this amount of money to go to trainer time or staff time or marketing budget. So are we on track with those things, and kind of measure in real time, how are we, are we spending our time and effort and staff resources in a similar way to as we planned, and kind of be able to spot issues, before they come up or before they develop into crises. And then lastly, fund. Like I said, this is where a lot of times in nonprofits, we start the process of budgeting is we see a grant application, it's asking for a budget. So we then go kind of backtrack to create the budget. In an ideal scenario, we're creating the budget in the planning stage, and then able to use that budget to plug into proactively into future grant applications. And actually, by creating a more holistic budget for the organization, we'll be able to see where do we need to potentially raise additional funds, or how do we break out components of the budget to fit into the scopes of some potential grant applications that we're finding out in the philanthropic market. You go to the next slide, Nitika. Thanks for joining us, Felicia. We've just started getting into some of the details on creating a program budget for a nonprofit, which is what we're talking about today. So the process of creating a budget, first I'm going to start high level about creating an organizational budget, and then we'll be going into a specific example of creating a budget for one individual program or one individual grant request. So the budgeting process, we really, like I said, want to start not at the stage that we've identified a grant and want to apply for that grant that's asking for a budget, but really start more proactively earlier in the year, maybe 3 months before your calendar year or your program year starts, 3 months before your major fundraising season kicks off, to start thinking proactively, what is the vision of what we want to accomplish as an organization? What are the set of programs or activities that we want to accomplish? What do we feel like are the reasonable amounts of resources that we're going to be able to fundraise and deploy to deliver a certain amount of benefit to a number of participants, and try to map that out proactively, defining the programs, the timelines, the goals, to be able to also do some cost analysis of starting to figure out how much are those activities going to cost. Some of that can happen from looking backward at your previous financials to figure out how much those have cost. Some of it is predicting how much future programs are going to cost. Some of it could be through stakeholder engagement of talking to your board, talking to your staff members, talking to other nonprofits and asking them, hey, we're looking at, starting this meal program. You run a similar program. Can you help us figure out what might we expect the costs to be in a sort of ballpark fashion? So as we're developing our budget and then going to go fundraise for it, right? So then the final step, like I said, if you're able to come up with the organizational budget, get everybody's buy-in, kind of vet those numbers that they seem realistic based off of your experience and the experience of your stakeholders, then you can figure out, okay, now we know how much money we want to fundraise, and start to identify grant opportunities that fit into components of that budget, which is going to help you also when you're looking at what grant opportunities are out there, being able to more quickly assess, are they a good fit for what we already want to do, and say yes, no, and then pursue them, rather than trying to look at each grant and say, could we do that? Yes or no? And then trying to figure out on the back end, how do we kind of adapt our program to fit into the grant application that's in front of us, if that makes sense. So Nitika, could you go to the next slide? Great. So we talked about kind of the high level organizational level budget. We're now going to use as sort of a miniature example, a simplified budget for a specific program. So for Business Services Collective, for us, a program could be, we're applying for a grant. It's going to be for 10 construction business owners. We're going to do 10 weeks of weekly workshops in a classroom setting with the business owners. And then we're also going to be doing some one-on-one coaching or office hours with the business owners outside of the classroom setting, right? And then, so that's kind of the program we're going to be using as an example, as a part of the larger ecosystem of what our organization provides. So one thing we want to be able to do here is to start to break down that vision that I described into a series of steps that operationally have to happen, and then assign costs to those steps. And one of the big points that I want to communicate today is to really include all of the steps as much as possible that are involved in that program. A lot of times as nonprofits, the natural place to go is to think about, okay, I said weekly workshops, how much is it going to cost to hire a trainer to provide those workshops? Maybe I'm going to think about the outreach, knowing how much groundwork goes into doing the outreach, the social media blitz, the door knocking to local businesses to get them signed up. But I might forget about all of the time that we're spending on the program design up front, designing the program, writing grant applications, all of that work, or on the back end, collecting all the surveys, and writing that final grant report. I think that's one of the areas where as nonprofits, we kind of underfund ourselves if we're not putting costs to all the activities that we know go into the for the hours to write the grant application, but internally I know that I'm collecting that money from the grant because those are staff members that I have to pay, and it makes sense to accrue that to this grant application. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we've started to break the program into these different pieces, and now the steps to creating a budget before I dive into the example will be to really get as detailed as possible in those different stages. Actually perform that step. How many hours do I think that step is going to take? And then this is where you start to get to do kind of the art and the science of budgeting. So if you're a nonprofit professional, you may enjoy one of those halves of either being kind of the artful visionary designer or the science operational cost management person. And you may want to team up with someone in your organization to help fill in the other half of this formula. But there's kind of two ways to estimate these costs. One is to kind of look ahead and predict based off of your experience and kind of common sense. How many hours do we think these activities are going to take? That could also include, like I said, reaching out to other nonprofits who've done similar work and kind of pick their brain. And some of this could be looking back at your historical information, right? So it could be looking back at your payroll or timesheets and try to pull out how many hours did we spend on these different activities. And then compare those two numbers. And Nitika and I actually did that exercise when we were coming up with our program budget a few years ago. And it was fun to see what she predicted looking ahead, how many hours it would take, and me looking back at my calendar and counting out the hours that I had tracked on my timesheet. They matched up pretty closely, and we were able to kind of meet in the middle and say, okay, that feels like a really strong gut instinct measurement of how many hours we think these different activities are going to take. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. And I'm now going to share my screen with walking through an example of one of Business Services Collective's programs. And then we're going to do kind of a light walkthrough as a group of how to fill out one of these yourself. Okay, so let me just adjust my screen for a second. Somebody could give me
Yep, we can see
a
it.
thumbs up. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this example is kind of a simplified version of a Business Services Collective program. So I described we've got 10 participants. I start on the left by breaking out those categories of program design, the marketing outreach phase, the programming phase, and then kind of the closeout, right? And you can see I've broken out the individual steps and tried to get pretty detailed of, finalize the program design, create the flyer, create the application for the program, doing the newsletter outreach. We're doing some individual calls to candidates, kind of recruit them into the program after they responded to the flyer. I've got the 10 weekly workshops, I've got coaching sessions, and then I've even got time for our final report. Then I assigned a role to each of these. So in this example, I've got a program person and a marketing person. So they're going to work together on the program design. The marketing person is going to do the social media e-blast, and then the program person is going to be leading the workshops and writing the final report. We then determine the number of hours each of these steps is going to take. And here I'm going to introduce kind of another component, which is fixed cost versus variable cost. So fixed cost tasks take the same amount of time no matter how many participants we have. So the program design, the sending out the newsletter, that takes the same amount of time, whether I have 2 participants or 25 participants, right? And then variable costs, it goes up times how many participants I have. So for individual calls to candidates, I said, I want 3 times as many leads as participants. So if we want 10 participants, I'm going to have 30 leads in these 1-hour calls with them. So it's going to be 3 hours per participant for a total of 30 hours of work there. Similar with the weekly workshop classroom style, that's a fixed cost. I have, hours that the instructor is teaching a classroom. The individual coaching is a variable cost. That's multiplies as we increase the number of participants we have. So I've got a line item cost here. If I change the number of participants, that's going to automatically change the cost over here. For the cost per hour right here, I'm basically using staff time. And one thing that makes this a little difficult is, and this is another kind of nonprofit, like I said, where we kind of underfund ourselves, is I think, well, I know what this person makes per hour, I'll just plug that in. But maybe what I didn't account for is things like payroll taxes, benefits, the fact that we've got paid time off, vacation, we've got holidays, we've also got sick time. People are going to be out sick. So if I actually take up, in this example, an $80,000 salary, I add payroll taxes and benefits on top of that, I get to the cost to the organization. I then account for, well, they're going to be out of the office for about 5 weeks of the year. So we're actually going to be dividing this cost not by 52 weeks, but by 47 weeks, which is this many hours. So I get to a cost that is about $50 an hour. So that's the number I'm going to plug in here versus if I just took, what I thought the hourly rate was, it might be more like $35 an hour, right? And then I'd be underfunding myself. And then I like to keep notes for myself to say, okay, here's the math that's going into this. With the final program design, I'm saying it's going to be 2 people times 5 hours each, which is this 10 hours, $50 a person. That's how I get to that line item cost. So I get to my total direct costs down here. I'm also going to add 10% for indirect costs. So this is a little bit of that art and science, but these are the costs that are difficult to measure and assign specifically to this program. So this would be our office rent, our office insurance, not the insurance of the staff members, but like our general liability insurance, some of the software that we use, right? It might be hard to break that out to this specific program. So I'm going to add 10% to cover those costs. And I get to this total program budget. Internally, I know it's going to cost me about $13,000. But again, this may not be exactly what I show the funder. I may simplify this a little bit and say my grant request is going to be for $15,000 just to give me some additional cushion. The last thing I want to show in this example is now that I've built out this model, I could of course use this as a template for a similar program. But I also now have a total fixed cost per cohort of about $3,800 plus a variable cost per participant of about $1,800. So I know if someone said, I want to do a workshop for 5 people, I say, well, it's going to cost $3,800 just to set it up. And then that $1,800 per participant. That's going to give you a much better ballpark than if I just took this number and divided it by 10. To be able to quickly scale up if someone was asking me for a proposal, if I met them at a networking event, or if I was looking at a grant application that say it was for $50,000 to work with 25 businesses, I could quickly assess, is this worth my time by just doing the quick math of $3,800 plus $1,800 per participant, right? And then if I say, yes, it's worth my time to pursue, then go through and fill out this template a little more detailed to get at my exact number. So I'm going to pause there. That was the example for BSC. We've got this template that we're going to share with everyone later in the webinar for you to be able to use for yourself. And basically the way that you'll use that template is it's going to be view only. So you'll want to go to file and then make a copy, and you'll be able to edit that copy for yourself. What I'm going to do is go over here and we're going to spend, I think, about 10 minutes walking through an example. So you see, I've got it set up similar with the formulas and everything. And if somebody wanted to volunteer with kind of an example program that you have, maybe a simplified version of a program that you have, we'll walk through the steps of putting together a light budget just so that everybody can see the idea of how you start to fill out this template. Does that sound good?
Yep. Thank you, Kyle. So we are looking for volunteers from the group right now, and hopefully you don't have to come on camera, but if one of you could share a bit about what are the stages of your program, and how would you find this exercise helpful in terms of, and we'll work it with you to see how we can break down some of those elements. And when you share cost per hour, it's not like we're not going to use that to determine your salary. Like, that's not the point of this. This exercise is essentially to put what we've learned to practice. So we're hoping one of you could raise your hand or get off mute and share any particular program within your organization that comes to mind, which you've wondered how to put a budget for or have recently put a budget for and would like to share with the group.
I wouldn't mind sharing City Motivators.
Thank you, Felicia.
You're welcome.
Great.
Could you tell
Thank you,
a bit
Felicia.
about what you do and what program do you have in mind?
So City Motivators, we're a 501c3 nonprofit that serve under-resourced and underserved community in the South Shore Chicago area. We host a lot of events, fellowship events, hoping to eliminate hopelessness within the community and cultivate the minds of the youth through our resource events, fellowship events, and also providing our program, Shy Youth Leadership Program that we just started last summer, teaching life skills, health and wellness, community engagement, and also a program that we started 2 years ago called the Essential Care Kit Program, where we provide essential items to high school seniors that are going to college and also college students, laundry detergent, soap, tissue, deodorant, things of that nature.
Excellent.
And we are in desperate need of revamping, really strongly having a strong budget because basically I just went upon and my board member went upon what we basically the materials that we've gathered and things like that. We really didn't include anything for ourselves or anything like that. So we most definitely need, work on our budget.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a very common error we make at nonprofits. We usually account for the tangible things and not for the time that staff spend. So would you like to engage in a slight budgeting exercise, and we can maybe think through some of the steps that you should be thinking about as you put through that budget?
Yes.
Great. Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah. And Felicia, thank you for volunteering.
You're welcome. I'm on my phone because it just came from another, running from something else. And I really can't see the slides. I'm trying to, I was trying to bring it up on my computer, but it's not coming up.
And that's okay.
I think we've got a recording of the event to share as well, and we'll share the template as well. So yeah, as Nitika said, this is a great example where it's easy to count the materials. So I've got a section in the budget for materials, but we don't need to spend as much time on that because that's the part you're comfortable with. And this is, as Nitika said, this is the trick that all of nonprofits we play on ourselves is counting the materials and forgetting all the time that we spend. So if we just start with these categories of there's program design, there's outreach, and then there's actually delivering the program and closeout, let's just come up with a couple of steps for each of those and start assigning some costs. So in program design, you gave this example of, it sounded like and I forget the name of the program, sending college students some supplies for college, right?
Yes.
So if we use that example, how many hours might you think it would take to kind of design the program. So not actually delivering the stuff, but just all of the work that it takes. How many staff members does that take, and how many hours do you think you spend kind of finalizing all of those plans?
And when you say program design, do you mean like the flyer or
We can do
promo?
flyer design as well. We can break it out into multiple steps. So whatever steps you think are involved in kind of the planning part, we can map that out.
So myself and our program director, mainly we set up a time. It's normally twice a year when we dispense these items. So we just set up the time and the date. We have to contact the college where we've been reaching out to the colleges, and we'll send them the information to share. Also, we create the flyers. We pass out the flyers as well. We may build a promo on like Facebook and Instagram to make people aware of the information. Far as the time,
If I may add one element there. So you said you send it out to a college, but maybe you have to reach out to about 10 colleges before one college says, yes, we'll work
yeah,
with you, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
that time we don't account for. We don't think about the 10 colleges we had to reach out to before we got the one that said yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is also time. Somebody made those calls. Somebody reached out on emails, right? And so when we think of program design, outreach itself, and the program design piece is when you said you've met twice a year, but there are more elements there. Like, did you have to get like approvals? Did you have to talk to vendors? Did you have to do a lot of things to figure that out? So think of all those things as well. But just this one example, which you gave, we want to impress upon this idea that when we count that one college that did offer our programming, we don't take into account the 15 which said no. And we finally got to the one after, many rejections, or many which started but did not go through because things changed on their end or our end. And so that conversion from lead to actual is what we don't take into account. But I'm so glad you're talking through this so that others can understand this as well.
Yeah, that's most definitely true. I didn't think about that. And then we also, when we did get the yes, we had to have a Zoom meeting with them. We had to get approved. We had to send them an assessment form. After that, it was constant emails back and forth. Well, unfortunately, we didn't, on their part, there was no follow-up. So we had to wait and try to, contact them again for follow-up. So I'm talking about last year. So at the end, we were announced with the school that we were partnering with them. So again, back and forth with the email, we're waiting for their response. And it turned out that we had to end up contacting over 60 some students to make arrangements for them to come to an event that we were having to pick up their items because the school didn't follow up.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
So what you're doing of like listing all of those steps, I think this is, maybe the biggest learning from the day in terms of budgeting. This is the hardest step for us to get right, is to make sure we're really thinking about, and again, this is an internal document. So this isn't something that you need to show the funder in exactly this format, but being honest with ourselves about like, what are all the steps? I got to go to the college. I got to go to the outreach event. I got to look for parking. I got to all of the follow-up emails. It's us not counting for those hours and billing for them, essentially, that I think, we're putting ourselves in the position to not get paid for that time if we're not building it into the budget. So listing out those activities, and then the next steps would be assigning the staff members. So when you said like flyer design, who is the person who designs that flyer?
Myself, actually. We couldn't afford to have, a designer. I end up teaching myself how to do flyer designs. over the course of the 3 years because we are very underfunded and we can't afford to hire someone to constantly do flyers.
Mm-hmm.
So I always end up doing them.
And how many hours does it take to design a flyer for this program, say?
It takes me if I'm doing it in one day, I'm very picky, so it takes me about probably maybe 6 to 8 hours, and that's a long time, but that's how long it takes me.
Yeah. And this is the key learning. If it takes a full day, put in the 8 hours, because if like it's got to include, well, I got to get my head in the right state to be design thinking. I got to have a lunch break. Be realistic with yourself, right? And then build that in so that at least you can get paid for the flyer design. And then if the grant gets funded for that amount, then you can maybe be in a position to make a choice. Well, do I want to do it myself and pay myself for the 8 hours, or do I want to hand it off to someone else and pay them? And now I've got a budget line item. Do you have, in this example, we were using $50 an hour, cost per hour. Do you have like a hourly rate in mind, or for this example, we can use $50 an hour, or?
I don't. I really need help with budgeting. I hate that I was late because I know that I'm underfunding, and we've only been around for 3 years, and we're able to get a grant last year, and now I'm applying for other grants, and they're like, "Oh, what's your budget? What's this?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, okay." So, just trying to maneuver through these things is very, very difficult. And I have my board members, but they're my board members, treasurer, secretary. Basically, I just made a flyer saying join our team. Trying to eliminate some of the stress for myself, and just so we can keep going, because I love what we're doing, and we're so far this 3 years we've able to help over 3,000 youth and their families.
Wow.
Feeling the stress of it all, and I'm praying that I'm able to keep going. So right now I haven't paid myself anything, but I'm just trying. This is my full-time job. Thank God for my husband and my son, and but I'm living off savings, and I'm just like, I need to figure it out. So I really want to keep going. So
yeah,
this is something that I most definitely need, and there's so many other organizations out there like that, and it's just very stressful, especially when you see the need of these kids. And I believe you guys live, I don't know if you live in Chicago, what's going on in Chicago, the kids acting crazy downtown, and my organization supports the youth, and I want to be able to make sure that I'm mentally ready, to do that.
I think you raised such a good point, Felicia, because we talked about cost analysis today, which is a part of budgeting. And as much as it may seem like something you have to do for grants and for boards, and it's actually something that we have to do for our own sanity. There is a reason nonprofit staff or people who work with nonprofits are constantly burnt out. They're underpaid or not paid. They are double, triple working the amount that they should be. And it really boils down to the fact that we are really bad at documenting what all it takes. And the idea that you're spending a day creating a flyer, that's you would not count that time, right? You would not count that time thinking, oh, I just do it. But then that those 8 hours are coming from somewhere. And that also means those 8 hours are not being spent on something else, which then you also have to, right? And so it is not just about a financial exercise. It is essentially an exercise towards the financial health of the organization, which then really helps the mental health of the people who work there.
Right.
So budgeting really is more than putting income and expense, tracking down all these things. It can have such a good budget with a sound fundraising strategy can really create the right kind of morale within the organization where staff feels well paid, well appreciated. And it's not just about, I need this budget to get this grant. It has a much bigger strategic and cultural implication within the organization.
Yes, most
And
definitely.
I think too, I mean, especially when we were getting to this work a few years ago and going through these exercises, this was really helpful for me, like as a behavioral exercise to realize, it's hard for me to ask for money, which it's a shame. We work in the nonprofit sector and a lot of us are probably bad at asking for money because that's the entire model, right? And there was so much of this sense of like, well, if we can just get the money to do the good work, like I don't need to get paid. I'll do this and this and this for free. I don't mind plugging that in for free. But then as to Nitika's point, we get to a place where you're approaching burnout, or as we're looking to scale the organization, well, maybe I'm willing to do some for free, which isn't sustainable. And by the way, but I can't ask other people to do, right? Like if I'm going to hire a graphic designer, it's going to cost money. So listing all of this out and then realizing like, I had this behavioral sense of like, oh, geez, asking for a $25,000 grant for helping 10 people for 10 weeks, that just seems like a lot. But I mapped it all out. And Nitika and I say this all the time. We're like, that's what it takes. When we map it all out, we know it takes a day to make the flyer. It takes a lot of time to do all the outreach calls of getting people into the program. It takes a lot of time to send the emails and text messages with the participants if they need help, finding parking or whatever. Like all of that is part of the program. And so we have to charge for it. And the reality is that, I don't think we have a lot of experience where our grant was denied because it was for 15,000 instead of 12,000 or even 15 instead of 8, right? And so, but the cumulative effect of not accounting for that time is what gets us, but it's not necessarily making us more competitive or attractive to have this kind of lowball grant application, if that makes sense, right? Plus we know that like, that's not a sustainable model. We're not going to be able to hire staff or ever get out of this cycle if we're not acknowledging all the work that we're doing and then asking people to, cover it as a cost of the program.
Yeah, that's really a really great point.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that's where I am because I hate to ask for money, but I know I need it. And even in the grant, I'm like, oh, am I asking for too much? Or, and it's mainly because I haven't done a good budget or included all the things I need to include.
Yeah. Right. And you're not alone, Felicia. Like, please know that most nonprofits, especially in the communities that we are working with, we are so driven by the mission. And as you said, by the lives that we are impacting, that we often put ourselves at that's the first line item that can get cut, right? Is I don't need to be paid. It's just not going to sustain. There will be burnout. You can't carry this on your shoulders forever. I do want to take a few minutes to hear from others, Arshia, Liz, Jacqueline, Emily, and we want to move into what we call this section, which you can call it Q&A, but we like to call it wows and wonders. Like based on what you heard today, based on the exercise, what was like an aha moment or a wow for you is like something you'd not heard of or something that just stood out for you? And what's still a wonder? Like, what are you still wondering? What kind of questions do you still have after what you heard? And I would be the first to admit that to say that you can teach anyone budgeting in an hour is like you're fooling yourself. So that was not the goal. The goal was to give you a tool within budgeting, which is cost analysis. So we're not claiming that you should know everything about budgeting, but I'm curious to hear from the rest of you on.
Can I say?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, how do I find out? Are you guys going to be offering this extensively? Because this is something that's most definitely needed. I don't know where to get this information from. I've talked to other organizations, and unfortunately, you get a lot of people who don't want to share their, information, and for whatever reason, it makes it harder on if people would know that you harvesting information, it makes it harder to make a greater impact and to make our city better. So I'm not really sure where to get this official information from. So we can continue the work that we're doing and just be more impactful.
So I will put in the chat, which was going to be one of our next steps, is where do you go from here? So I've put in the link to schedule an appointment for a one-on-one, a follow-up from here. As we said, like, this is generic information, which is helpful, but what is really needed is deep work with your organization. So the city is offering resources which are paid for. You can, when you go through this form, you will find exactly topics that you can be approached, you can reach out for, and somebody will reach you back as an expert. And Lydia, if you want to talk more about that process for how that works. But to your point, Felicia, there is help, and there is help on a one-on-one basis and not just as a one-to-many like this webinar.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. First of all, thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Natika, and of course, Felicia, for sharing your challenges. And for us, Empowering Women NFP, we are a domestic violence service agency providing support to domestic violence survivors. And we have now expanded outside of our counseling services, wellness programs, into skills development programs. And we have seen the need in the areas that we work. This budgeting outline, I mean, it is huge. How do you, obviously time is the most valued thing that we have. And how do we value, that time? How do we put into, into that budget, what the amount of energy that goes into it, the amount of research that goes into it. And, we never thought about that before. So Kyle, highlighting that for us is huge. And again, we need to take care of our own emotional well-being, because it is extremely stressful to put a budget together. A fair and honest budget, that's the other thing that being in this area, we are a nonprofit, but it is still an organization that we are running. We want it to grow, and we want to be able to sustain ourselves, right? So all these little points, I think, having talked to Lydia earlier to this conversation that we are having now has been extremely helpful. So yeah, I mean, I'm here, in fact, to really learn and listen and how we can grow. We are also, like you had mentioned, Natika, that we started in 2020, empowering women right in the midst of COVID. And especially for domestic violence survivors and their families, there was a huge challenge. Services that were not readily available. So many institutions had closed down. So many services had shut down. So there was a limit, and unfortunately, for women survivors, there was a huge challenge for them. So empowering women coming into the midst. And again, Lydia had mentioned, and maybe I'm just going a little bit forward, about ways that you can partner with, with larger organizations as, we're thinking about applying for grants and, taking larger organizations, with us and seeing how our visions somewhat align. And, that can also be quite helpful. So yes, there's a lot of growing opportunity. I like the fact that we can have these weekly sessions and continue to learn and grow and find organizations that might be doing similar work to us, and how we can, grow together.
Absolutely. I want to emphasize that we are not when we were launched, we wish there were more opportunities like this for us to learn from other nonprofits and other resources. This is a great initiative that the city has put together. So please know that there's a form where you can really schedule a follow-up. It seems like, Arshia, you already are using a lot of these resources, which is great. But for others, there is an immediate one-on-one follow-up to this session. We would also like to point you to what we call a financial health assessment for your nonprofit, which can kind of be a report card. And it's a report card, not that you have to show it to a funder. It's a report card for yourself, right? For you to understand which systems is where you need to start, which systems are in place, which aren't, and where do you even start? So once you get that, then there are other experts, which is all again paid for, where you can schedule one-on-one time with somebody who can help you prepare your budget, who can help you understand how to put those systems in place. So there are tremendous resources that are being offered through this particular opportunity from the city, and I would highly encourage all of you to make use of it. And sometimes the system can be cryptic. You go to the form, you don't hear back, but that's why we've also wanted to leave you with our contact information for you to, if the form is not working or if you need more information, please do follow up with us. And we would love to help out. We've been there in the same shoes. We are still there. Like, there are times where we are, there were 4 months last year where we could not make payroll happen for our nonprofit because there was a delay in funding. And so we know exactly how you feel, Arshia, and others here as well. And so this is a great opportunity that we would highly encourage you to make use of. And these are our emails. But apparently the city, just to keep track of who's being helped, really needs you to go through that form. So we are really going to direct you towards that form to access the resources.
Thank you so much.
And I'm just putting that link one more time because I know chat can get tricky sometimes. So you may or may not have seen it. Lydia, how would you like to close?
Well, I want to thank everyone for contributing to this conversation. I think it was rich, and I think it was helpful and useful for many of us. So I wanted to thank Nitika and Kyle for their good work in making this presentation happening today.
Thank you. Happy to be a part of it.